My daughter got married, and I found out when I saw the photos online. That's the sentence that still burns when I say it out loud, like ash caught in the back of my throat. I don't know which hurt more, the secret itself, or realizing my little girl didn't think I deserved to know. The photo was a square on my phone screen, perfectly filtered, perfectly happy. A white lace dress, sunlight on her shoulders, and a man I didn't recognize holding her hand like he'd been doing it forever. The caption read, "The best day of our lives. Mrs. and Mr. Collins." Mrs. Collins, my daughter Lydia. I remember sitting at the kitchen table that morning, still in my robe, coffee going cold beside me. The house was quiet, too quiet, and that's when I knew something had shifted for good. People say you can feel heartbreak in your chest, but they don't tell you it comes with silence. Like the world suddenly stops making noise because even the air knows it should give you space to fall apart. Lydia had always been my sunshine. She came into this world crying louder than any baby in that ward, and for 18 years, my life revolved around her. Every lunchbox, every scraped knee, every school concert, I was there. Her father wasn't, not since she was 7. He left for another woman, another family, and I promised myself I would never let Lydia feel abandoned again. I thought I kept that promise. When she left for college, I cried for a week straight. I kept her room exactly how she left it, the posters on the walls, her lavender bedsheet, even the stuffed bear missing one button eye. Every visit home she would laugh, "Mom, you've got to move on," but she'd still sleep in that same bed, under that same lavender sheet. We were close. Or at least, I thought we were. Calls every Sunday, texts every other day. She told me about her classes, her friends, her stress. But there was one name she never mentioned, Daniel Collins. It wasn't until last Christmas that I first noticed the distance. She said she couldn't make it home, too much work, she said, but sent a box with a sweater and a card that read, "Love you always, Mom. Always." That word stung more than it should have, because it felt rehearsed, detached. Still, I wrapped myself in that sweater all winter, convincing myself it was enough. So when I saw that photo, her in white, smiling at a man I'd never met, something inside me cracked. I didn't even know she was engaged. She hadn't told me about him, hadn't mentioned a single word, and now she was someone's wife. I scrolled through the comments, fingers shaking. "Beautiful couple, congratulations, Lydia and Daniel. Such a gorgeous wedding." Each comment was like a slap, a reminder that the world had celebrated something I wasn't even invited to witness. That night, I sat in her old room, the one that still smelled faintly of her vanilla lotion. I looked at her graduation photo on the dresser, her arms around me, both of us laughing, her eyes bright. I kept whispering, "Why, baby? Why didn't you tell me?" But the photo didn't answer. None of them ever do. The next morning I tried calling her, once, twice, then 10 times. Each one went to voicemail. By noon, I was pacing the kitchen like a caged animal. I left a message trying to sound calm, but my voice broke halfway through. "Lydia, sweetheart, I saw the photos. I wish you'd told me. I love you, honey, please call me." She didn't. Not that day, not the next. When she finally did, her voice was clipped, tired, like she'd rehearsed what to say. "Mom, I was going to tell you," she said, "but it all happened so fast. We didn't want a big wedding." "So fast?" I asked, trying to steady my voice. "You couldn't make one phone call?" She sighed. "I didn't want drama. You always make things emotional." That word emotional cut deeper than she knew. Because she was right. I was emotional. I'd earned the right to be. I'd raised her through every storm, worked 2 jobs, skipped meals so she could have school trips and piano lessons, and now she said it like a flaw. "I just wanted peace," she added softly, and Daniel thought. "Daniel?" I interrupted, the name tasting sour. "So he decided for you? Mom, please. Don't make this harder." She hung up soon after, leaving me with silence once again. But this time, it wasn't just silence, it was humiliation. For weeks, I avoided social media. I couldn't stand seeing her new last name, her new life. Friends sent texts, "Did you know? She looks beautiful." And I'd reply with vague, polite lines. Yes, I'm happy for her. Lies I told to keep from unraveling in front of them. but inside, resentment began to fester. Not against Daniel, I didn't even know him, but against the space she'd created between us. Every time I passed her room, I saw it not as a memory, but as a monument to what used to be mine. Until one afternoon, standing by the window, I realized she wasn't coming back. Not to this house, not to this town, not even to me. And that was when the idea came, quiet, sharp, and certain. If she could build a new life without me, then I could let go of what tied me to her. I picked up the phone, called the real estate agent, and said the words that surprised even me. Yes, I'm ready to sell the house. I didn't cry when I signed the papers. I didn't even look back when the agent asked if I was sure. I just smiled, that tight, practiced smile mothers use when they're trying not to fall apart. What I didn't know then was that selling the house wouldn't be the end. It would be the beginning of something Lydia never expected. The day after I decided to sell the house, the world felt unnervingly still, the kind of stillness that comes before a storm or after one. I walked through each room like I was saying goodbye to an old friend, tracing my fingers along the walls I once painted myself. This house had been more than brick and wood. It had been a witness to birthdays, to heartbreaks, to laughter so loud it rattled the windows. I had built it, quite literally, from nothing after Lydia's father left. We were broke then, barely keeping the lights on, but I'd managed. Every corner of that home carried the proof of my survival. The smell of coffee had always meant safety here. The soft hum of the ceiling fan, the creak of the hallway floorboard that I never fixed because Lydia said it sounded like the house breathing. Even the chipped tile near the stove, I could still remember the night she dropped a skillet trying to make pancakes for dinner. Now, it was just an empty echo. I started sorting through her things, not to throw them away, but to remind myself that she was once real in this house. Her notebooks from high school, a dried corsage from prom, the stack of letters she wrote to herself as a child. She used to say, "Future Lydia will thank me for this." Future Lydia didn't even call. Still, I folded everything neatly into boxes, labeled them, and set them aside. I told myself I was preparing for closure, but in truth, I was building a boundary, a line between the life I'd given and the one I was no longer invited to share. The real estate agent, a young man named David, came by 2 days later. He wore a crisp shirt and spoke with the kind of forced cheer people use when they sense your sadness but don't know how to touch it. "This neighborhood's hot right now," he said, stepping into the living room. "You'll get a great offer, I'm sure of it." I nodded, though my throat felt tight. "Just make it quick," I said quietly. He gave me a sympathetic smile. Leaving memories behind can be hard. I wanted to laugh. Hard? It felt like cutting out a piece of my own heart and leaving it on the curb for strangers to walk over. But I didn't say that, I just nodded again. When he left, I stood by the front door, looking out at the maple tree Lydia and I planted when she was 6. It had grown tall and wide, its branches thick and tangled, a living timeline of our years together. She used to climb it barefoot, scrape her knees, and come running to me, demanding a Band-Aid and a kiss. I thought of that as I stared at the tree, realizing I'd raised her to be strong but never thought she'd climb. So far, she'd forget to look back down. Days passed in a blur of paperwork and goodbyes I didn't know how to say. My neighbors, the Johnsons, came over with pie, their way of checking in without prying. "You sure about this, Evelyn?" Mrs. Johnson asked, her kind eyes scanning my half-packed living room. "Sure enough," I said, though the words came out brittle. "Well," she sighed, "sometimes letting go's the only way to get peace." Peace. Everyone kept saying that word like it was something you could buy, like new furniture for a smaller apartment. But peace wasn't what I wanted. I wanted acknowledgement, a call, an apology, something that said I still mattered. By the end of the week, the house was officially listed. I packed my car with essentials, clothes, photos, a few kitchen things, and stayed with my sister for a while. She was the only one who knew what had happened. "You're being strong," she told me, handing me tea that smelled faintly of lemon and honey. "Selling that place? It's brave." "I don't feel brave," I murmured. "I feel empty." "Sometimes," she said softly, "empty's the space where healing starts." I wanted to believe her. But healing felt like a luxury, and I was too tired for luxuries. A few weeks later, I got a call from David, the agent. "We've got a serious buyer," he said. "Young couple, they love the place." "Good," I replied, though something twisted in my chest. "They want to meet the owner before finalizing," he continued. "Tomorrow afternoon, if you're available, meet the owner." I almost said no, but a strange part of me wanted to see who would take over the home that had been my life's work. "All right," I said quietly. "I'll be there." The next afternoon, I arrived early. I walked through the house one last time, the light falling in soft stripes through the kitchen window, the air still carrying that faint smell of cinnamon I could never quite get out of the walls. I stood by the mantel, running a hand along the family photo still there, Lydia and me on her 16th birthday, frosting on our noses, laughing like the world was kind. When the doorbell rang, I composed myself. David stood there with a bright smile, flanked by a couple in their early 30s. The woman had soft brown hair, the man a confident stance. They looked around with polite admiration. "Beautiful home," the woman said. "Feels lived in." "It is," I replied, forcing a smile. "It's been loved too." They exchanged a look, that kind of couple's glance that says, "We could have this. We could make it ours." I told myself that was enough. Someone else would fill the silence I was leaving behind. But then, as they stepped into the living room, something caught my eye, the woman's hand. A glint of a ring that looked painfully familiar. A simple gold band with a tiny diamond, almost swallowed by light. My breath hitched, my pulse raced, because I'd seen that ring before, in those wedding photos. And as she turned to face me fully, her voice, that voice I'd known since the day she was born, said softly, "Hi, Mom." The sound hit me like thunder in a quiet church. Lydia, my daughter, standing there smiling nervously beside her new husband, the man from the photo. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. The air between us felt thick, unbreathable. She looked around the room, her eyes flickering with emotion. "I didn't know you'd really sell it," she whispered. "Well," I finally said, my voice cold even to my own ears, "you didn't tell me you were getting married. I suppose we're even." Lydia froze when I said that I suppose we're even. The words hung there, trembling in the air like smoke from a match that had just gone out. Her husband, Daniel, glanced at her, clearly uncomfortable. "Maybe we should." "No," she interrupted softly, her voice low but steady. "I need to talk to her." David, the poor agent, looked from one of us to the other, then cleared his throat. I'll give you all a moment," he said quickly, backing out the door. The sound of it closing behind him felt like the last polite thing the world would do for us that afternoon. For a few long seconds, no one spoke. Lydia took a hesitant step forward. "Mom, I didn't know you were really selling the house," she said. "You always said you'd live here forever." "Forever changes," I replied. My tone was sharp, colder than I intended, but I couldn't stop it. My hands trembled slightly, so I clasped them in front of me. "Seems like you've learned that lesson better than I have." Daniel shifted uncomfortably again. "Mrs. Evelyn, we didn't mean to." I turned to him, my eyes narrowing. "You can call me Mrs. Harper." He blinked, then looked at Lydia for guidance, but she stayed quiet, her eyes darting away. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears, that familiar ache rising in my throat. I wanted to scream, to ask her how she could do this, how she could stand in the house I'd built, pretending it wasn't breaking her too. But her face was calm, too calm, and that made it worse. "Why didn't you tell me?" I finally asked, my voice cracking on the last word. "Why did I have to find out from the internet like a stranger?" Lydia swallowed hard. "It wasn't about you, Mom. We wanted something simple, private. I didn't want a big scene." "A scene?" I repeated bitterly. "Is that what I am to you now? A scene?" She flinched but didn't deny it. "I didn't want you to be hurt," she said softly. "Well, that worked out beautifully, didn't it?" Daniel stepped forward, trying to mediate. "It wasn't personal, Mrs. Harper." Lydia just what? I snapped. Didn't think her mother should be there to see her get married? Didn't think the woman who raised her deserved to meet her husband before the wedding? My voice was rising, shaking. I could see Lydia's eyes filling with tears, but it wasn't enough to soften me. Not yet. She finally spoke, her voice trembling. You would have tried to control it. The guest list, the colors, everything. I just wanted to do it my way for once. Control it? I whispered, staring at her in disbelief. Lydia, I've controlled everything for you since the day you were born. I controlled the bills so you could go to college. I controlled my pain so you wouldn't grow up thinking love was something that leaves. I controlled every bit of myself to give you a life that was steady. She looked down, her shoulders sagging. I know, Mom. No, you don't, I said quietly, stepping closer. Because if you did, you wouldn't have done this. The silence that followed was suffocating. Even Daniel looked like he didn't know where to put his hands. He finally cleared his throat and murmured, "Maybe I'll wait outside." He slipped out, leaving just the two of us in the living room, the same one where I'd once taught her how to waltz, standing on my toes in her tiny socks while we laughed to an old record. Now, we stood there like strangers. Lydia took a deep breath. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "I really am. I didn't mean to hurt you. I just wanted a new beginning. You've been so wrapped up in the past, Mom. I thought if I started fresh, you'd find a way to do the same." My jaw clenched. "By cutting me out of it?" She winced. "It wasn't like that." "It was exactly like that," I said, my voice low. "You made a choice, and that choice told me I wasn't part of your life anymore." Tears slipped down her cheeks then. And for the first time since she'd arrived, she looked like my daughter again, fragile, human, confused. "Mom, please," she whispered. "Don't sell it. This house, it's home. For both of us." I looked at her. Really looked at her. And for a fleeting moment, I almost gave in. I almost told her I'd keep it. But then the memory of that wedding photo flashed in my mind again, her smile, the way she'd looked like a stranger to me. "No," I said finally. "It stopped being our home the day you decided I didn't belong in your new one." She cried harder, covering her mouth with her hand, and I turned away before I could weaken. She left soon after, barely able to look at me. Daniel tried to say something, "We'll call," or maybe, "We'll make it right," but I didn't listen. When the door closed behind them, I sank onto the couch, my whole body trembling. The clock ticked in the background, indifferent to everything that had just shattered. I thought I'd feel vindicated, powerful, even for standing my ground. But all I felt was tired. I stayed there until sunset, the light slowly fading across the room, turning the walls a deep orange before swallowing them in shadow. That's when I whispered to the empty air, "She'll come back. She has to." But deep down, I wasn't sure anymore. The house sold 2 weeks later. I signed the final papers without fanfare. David congratulated me, handed me a pen, and I smiled as if it were just another errand checked off the list. He didn't see the tears that came later when I locked the door for the last time and pressed my palm against the wood one final time. "Thank you," I whispered to it, "for keeping us safe." Then I left the key in the mailbox and walked away without looking back. I rented a small apartment across town, nothing fancy, just quiet, the kind of place no one asked questions in. I filled it with as few things as possible, trying to convince myself that simplicity meant peace. But at night, lying in bed, I'd still see her face, the way her voice broke when she said, "Don't sell it." And though I told myself I'd done the right thing, a small voice inside whispered something I didn't want to hear. That maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of the story. I didn't expect to hear from Lydia again so soon. In truth, I thought months, maybe years would pass before she reached out, if she ever did at all. But it was only 3 weeks after the house sold that her name flashed across my phone screen. I stared at it for a long time before answering. The world outside my little apartment was quiet, a kind of Sunday stillness that made the sound of her ringtone feel almost sacred. I picked it up on the third ring, my heart hammering. "Mom?" Her voice was small, hesitant. "Lydia," a long silence. "Then can we talk?" I exhaled slow. "We're talking now." "No, I mean in person." That surprised me. "Why?" "Because there are things I didn't tell you." Her voice cracked slightly. "Things you should know." I closed my eyes. I could have said no. I could have protected what little peace I had left, but even after everything, she was still my daughter. And love, as I'd learned too many times, doesn't dissolve, it lingers like perfume in a closed room. "All right," I said quietly. "Come tomorrow, noon." She arrived alone. No Daniel this time. When I opened the door, I saw a version of her I hadn't seen in years. Pale, tired, her eyes red-rimmed. She looked like a girl trying to wear a woman's skin. "Hi," she said softly. "Come in." She stepped inside, glancing around the small apartment like it was a stranger's life she was visiting. The smell of lemon cleaner and old paper filled the air. I gestured toward the table. "Sit." She did, clasping her hands together. I could see her wedding ring, dull under the light. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, she looked up and said, "Daniel and we're not okay." I kept my face calm. "I see." She took a shaky breath. "You were right about him. I should have listened." I blinked. "I didn't say anything about him." "You didn't have to," she said, almost smiling through tears. "The look in your eyes that day said everything." Then she told me. The story came out in fragments, half whispered, half choked. Daniel wasn't cruel, not exactly, but he was controlling, quietly so. The kind of man who smiled in public and cut you down in private. The kind who'd say, "I only want what's best for you," while deciding what best meant without asking. He'd started with small things, her clothes, her friends, how much she worked. Then her phone. Then her access to money. "When I told him I wanted to visit you," she said, her voice trembling, "he said it would stir up old drama. He made me block your number for a while. I didn't even realize he'd deleted your contact." I stared at her, my hands tightening around my cup. "He what?" Tears spilled over. "He said you'd try to control me, to turn me against him. And for a while, I believed him." I sat back, stunned. The betrayal had a new shape, now one I hadn't expected. It wasn't just my daughter who had shut me out. It was a man who had wanted me gone from her life altogether. "Why didn't you leave?" I asked softly. She looked down. "Because by the time I realized what was happening, I didn't know how. I thought, if I kept the peace, things would get better. But they didn't." Her hands shook. "Yesterday," he yelled at me. Over a text from my coworker, he threw a glass. It didn't hit me, but it was close. Something inside me snapped. That old, fierce mother's instinct roared back like a flame that had been waiting for oxygen. "Where is he now?" I asked. "At home," she whispered. "He thinks I went to stay with a friend." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Then you're staying here. For as long as you need." The next few days were fragile, filled with small, quiet routines. Lydia slept late, barely spoke, barely ate. I cooked her favorite meals: chicken soup, mashed potatoes, the foods of childhood comfort. Sometimes she'd wake from a nap, disoriented, and I'd catch her staring at me like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to. One evening, while we sat on the couch, she whispered, "I don't deserve your kindness." I turned to her. "You're my daughter. You don't have to earn that." Tears welled in her eyes again. "I was so awful to you. I don't even know why I thought. Because love makes fools of all of us," I said gently. "And because I failed to teach you that love doesn't mean obedience." She leaned into me then, resting her head on my shoulder, just like when she was little. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt something like peace. But peace doesn't last long in stories like ours. The next morning there was a knock at the door, a sharp, impatient knock. Lydia froze, her face drained of color. I didn't need to ask who it was. When I opened the door, Daniel stood there, polite smile, hands in his pockets, eyes cold as winter. "Mrs. Harper," he said smoothly. "Can I come in?" "No," I replied. His smile didn't falter. "My wife left some things at the house. I'd like to speak with her. She doesn't want to speak with you." He leaned slightly closer, lowering his voice. "You're making this worse for her, you know. She's confused, emotional. She needs stability." "Stability," I said, my voice like steel. "You mean control?" His jaw tightened. "With all due respect, this is between Lydia and me." Then talked. Every time the pipes groaned or the wind brushed the window, I half expected another knock. Lydia was curled up on the couch, finally breathing evenly after crying herself to sleep. I sat in the armchair watching her, listening to that quiet rhythm. My daughter was home again, but not the same one who left, and I wasn't the same mother who'd let her go. By morning, I'd made a decision. It wasn't one of anger, it was clarity. That sharp stillness that comes after grief has burned through every other feeling. I called a lawyer first. Then, the police. I told them everything, the intimidation, the threats, the fear in my daughter's eyes. They advised us to file a restraining order. Lydia hesitated when they handed her the papers, her hand shaking slightly. "Are you sure?" she whispered. I looked her straight in the eye. "He made you afraid in your own home. You don't owe fear your loyalty," she signed. When she set the pen down, I saw something flicker across her face, not relief yet, but something close. The next few days moved quietly. We both worked from the apartment, her trying to find a new job, me returning to my bookkeeping clients. There were moments when laughter crept back into the space between us, small and cautious, like a child peeking out from behind a curtain. But then, one afternoon, while we were cooking, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You shouldn't have interfered." "She's my wife." Lydia saw it, her face going pale. "Mom." I locked eyes with her and deleted the message. "He wants us scared. Don't give him that." But that night, when I took out the trash, I saw a car parked across the street, its engine off, its windows tinted. It didn't move for hours. The next morning I noticed footprints near the stairwell mud tracked up to the second floor, stopping just outside our door. I called the police again. They promised to send a patrol by, but I could hear it in their tone, the quiet skepticism reserved for domestic matters. So I did what I've always done. I protected what was mine. I installed cameras by the door, changed the locks, and bought motion lights for the hallway. Lydia tried to protest, but I caught her looking out the window that night, pulling the curtain closed a little tighter. It was 2 days later when Daniel showed up again. This time he didn't knock. It was early evening. The light outside had turned that heavy gold orange of dying daylight. Lydia was in the kitchen, humming to herself as she chopped vegetables, then a sound, a key turning in the lock. She froze. Our eyes met. "How does he?" she started. I didn't let her finish. I moved to the door, grabbed the handle, and shoved it shut just as it started to open. "Lydia!" I shouted. "Call 911!" There was a heavy thud on the other side, his voice muffled but furious. "Evelyn, open this door right now!" My pulse pounded in my ears. "You don't belong here, Daniel!" I yelled back. "This is my wife's home!" he roared. "You're poisoning her against me!" I pressed harder against the door, my shoulder screaming with the effort. Lydia was on the phone, shaking. "He has a key!" she cried to the dispatcher. "He's trying to get in!" After what felt like forever, sirens wailed in the distance. Daniel must have heard them too, because the pounding stopped. By the time the officers arrived, the hallway was empty, only scuffed paint and a bent key still lodged in the lock. Lydia was trembling so hard she could barely speak. I wrapped her in my arms, and she collapsed against me. "I can't do this anymore, Mom," she sobbed. "I just can't." "You won't have to," I whispered. "Not again." The restraining order was expedited that night. The officers promised extra patrols. Lydia moved her remaining belongings from Daniel's apartment the next morning quietly, with police escort. She didn't take much, just clothes, a few books, and a framed photo of the two of them, which she later tore in half and threw away. Watching her do it broke me and healed me all at once. Over the next week, she began to come back to herself. The light returned to her eyes, the small habits I'd missed, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when thinking, the way she sang softly while cleaning. One night, over dinner, she said, "You know, I used to think leaving meant failing." "And now?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "Now I think staying was." News spread fast in our town, as it always does. Friends who'd seen the wedding photos were now whispering about the restraining order, the police at his building, the broken door. I didn't say much when they called. I'd learned that truth doesn't need defending, it just needs time to breathe. Daniel's reputation didn't survive long. Word got around at his office. Eventually, he was asked to take indefinite leave. I didn't celebrate. Not really. Revenge wasn't what I wanted. What I wanted was quiet mornings again, and I got them. A month later, Lydia came to me with a proposal. "I found something," she said, opening her laptop to show me a listing. It was a small house on the edge of town, nothing fancy, just cozy. A porch swing, a patch of garden, a view of the hills. It's not the same, she said, smiling nervously. But maybe we could make it home again? I stared at the screen, my throat tightening. For so long, that word home had meant pain, loss, and memory. But now, looking at her, I realized it could mean something new. Let's go see it, I said. She grinned through tears. Really? Really? We bought it together a week later. And when we stood in that empty living room, sunlight spilling through clean white curtains, she turned to me and whispered, "You sold the house, Mom, but you gave us another chance." I smiled, touching her cheek gently. Sometimes you have to let go of the walls to save the people inside them. That night, we unpacked boxes, cooked dinner on the floor, and laughed until midnight. The world had tried to take her from me. But in losing everything, our old house, her illusions, my pride, we'd found what mattered most. Each other. When the house sold, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like silence. There's a kind of quiet that settles after the storm, after all the shouting, after all the tears. It's not peaceful at first. It's heavy, like the air before rain. You walk through your own home and feel the ghosts of what used to be laughter over dinner, the sound of doors closing, a child calling Mama. That's what my mornings became after Lydia moved back in with me. She slept in her old room, though it looked different now. The posters were gone, the curtains drawn. Sometimes I'd stand by her door and listen. She'd cry quietly, not wanting me to hear, and I'd pretend I didn't. Because sometimes love means letting someone hurt in private until they can breathe again. It took months for her to start smiling again, and even longer for her to laugh. I never asked her about Daniel. She volunteered small pieces over time, the kind of cruelty that hides in small acts, forgetting anniversaries, mocking her friends, controlling her money. He wasn't the man I thought he was, but she wasn't the girl I'd raised either, not anymore. She was older now, not by years but by experience. And I could see in her eyes that she was rebuilding herself one small decision at a time. She got a new job at a local art studio, moved her things into a small apartment near the river, and started cooking again. I'd visit her once a week. We didn't talk about him. We didn't need to. The silence between us was finally kind. One Sunday morning, I found her in the garden, barefoot in the dew. She was painting something on a small canvas, something abstract, all blues and soft pinks. I watched her for a long time before she noticed me. "Do you hate him, Mama?" she asked softly, eyes still on her brush. I thought about it. I truly did. About the betrayal, the humiliation. The moment I'd seen those wedding photos online, the daughter I'd loved more than life itself standing next to a man I'd trusted, smiling as if I never existed. "No," I finally said. "I don't hate him. I don't have room in my heart for that anymore." She nodded, as if she understood. I think she did. Later that summer, I went to church for the first time in years. The same little white building with the slanted roof and the choir that always sang just a bit off-key. I sat in the back pew and listened to the pastor talk about forgiveness. He said forgiveness wasn't about excusing what was done, it was about freeing yourself from the weight of what you couldn't change. And I thought of my daughter, of the man who had taken her laughter, of the house I'd sold and the life I'd left behind. When the service ended, I lit a candle. One for the woman I used to be, one for the man who'd hurt us both, and one for the girl who was learning to live again. That evening, Lydia came over with a pie. She didn't say it, but I think she knew what the day meant to me. We sat on the porch swing, the air thick with the smell of jasmine. She leaned her head on my shoulder, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something close to peace. "Mama," she said quietly, "you were right to sell the house." I smiled. It was never about the house, baby. It was about starting over. We watched the sunset bleed into the horizon, colors fading from gold to pink to gray. I thought about how endings aren't always clean. Sometimes they just dissolve like light at dusk, fading slow, gentle, inevitable. Daniel tried to call once. I didn't answer. Lydia didn't either. We didn't need to. Some words don't need to be spoken when silence already says enough. Over the next year, I learned how to be alone without feeling lonely. I planted new roses in the garden, took long walks by the lake, and even started teaching cooking classes at the community center. The women there reminded me of myself, strong, tired, hopeful in ways they didn't even see yet. And sometimes, late at night, when the world was quiet, I'd sit by my window and think of that day I saw those wedding photos online, the shock, the heartbreak, the hollow ache that followed. But I also thought of what came after, of healing, of grace, of letting go, because the truth is, we don't always get to choose the people who break us, but we do get to choose how we put ourselves back together. And maybe that's what motherhood really is: loving, losing, forgiving, and loving again, no matter how much it hurts. When I look back now, I realize the hardest part wasn't losing the house, or the man who betrayed my daughter's trust. It was learning to love again without fear. To open my heart after it had been bruised by silence, disappointment, and pride. People think forgiveness is weakness, but I've learned it's the opposite. It's standing in the ashes of what was done to you and saying, I still choose peace. That's not surrender, that's power. So if you ever find yourself staring at a photo that breaks your heart, wondering how the people you love could forget you so easily, take a breath. Remember this: their choices do not define your worth. You can still rebuild, you can still forgive, you can still live a life so full of grace it makes the past feel small. Would you have done what I did? Would you have forgiven or walked away for good? Tell me in the comments. And if my story meant something to you, if it made you feel a little less alone tonight, don't forget to subscribe, because sometimes sharing our stories is the only way we heal.